Bill Higginbotham.
Hello.
You know, 13 minutes ago, I was all excited. I was going to talk about feral hogs. And then I had to wait and wait and wait. I'm glad to have you on, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I got an email earlier today at 11:42 from somebody at Texas A&M University about the myths of feral hogs. And I was told you were the feral hog expert.
Well, I'm one of them.
You're not comfortable saying you're the feral hog expert?
There's some awful smart people out there.
In the field of feral hoggery, who would you put kind of up there at the top?
Well, my colleague in South Carolina, Dr. Jack Mayer, wrote the book.
Yeah. No, yeah.
And so I have to defer to Jack when I get in trouble. He helps straighten me out.
All right. So tell me one of the myths of feral hogs that are running wild.
Well, there are many of them, and you can read and hear just about anything that you want to believe. No question, it's the most prolific large mammal on the face of the earth, and that has led to some astronomical guesstimates on not only the population size in Texas, but the rate of growth. Those are two of the most common myths. I'm excited because we finally got some real science behind some numbers that I think we can start closing in on population estimates. My colleague, the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, Dr. Roel Lopez, has done some work, and we have concluded from some of their estimates that we have about 2.5 million feral hogs in the state of Texas. Now, that's still an estimate, but that puts us much closer into the ballpark of what we're dealing with this exotic species.
Why do you call them exotic?
Because they are not native to the New World. They are native to Europe and Asia. In fact, the domestic swine that we have today are descendants of this same Eurasian wild boar that was imported into the United States hundreds of years ago.
And they're from where?
They're from both Western Europe and Asia.
So these are really Asian American hogs.
You could say Asian/European American hogs. Swine are not domestic to our country, just as horses and cattle are not. They were brought over some 450 years ago by Hernando de Soto into what is present-day Florida.
Rest his soul.
And they've been with us ever since.
You are an expert in feral hogs, but not the expert.
I'm one of the experts, but as I say, there's lots of smart people out there working on the feral hog issues.
Okay. You said there's 2.5 million feral hogs in the state of Texas. Estimate.
That is the estimate that we have now that we can actually put some science behind.
And what do you use to figure that number out? I mean, how do you begin to do that?
There's been about 8 published studies in different regions of the state of Texas that estimated feral hog populations. But we used geographic information systems, which is kind of an electronic mapping tool, to go in and identify feral hog habitat in the state of Texas. And then we used those population estimates and applied them to those regions in the state where they were conducted, and mashed a few computer buttons, and were able to come up with the first reliable population estimates that we have for the state.
Well, I'm thinking we could study the illegal alien habitat and figure out how many of them we have.
As far as I'm concerned, feral hogs qualify as illegal aliens.
Wait a minute. Well, you don't like feral hogs?
Feral hogs are an exotic to the United States, in fact, to the entire New World. They were brought over well over 450 years ago. They've been in Texas for the last 450 years ago, courtesy of some of the explorers, the early explorers on their expeditions. And so they've been here long enough that we think they've always been here, but true to form, as most exotics are, they often compete with our native wildlife species for food and space, in some cases preying directly upon those species, some of which are endangered.
Well, now, are we talking about, because I've read about Russian boars and Hawaiian hogs, is this a domestic gone wild? I mean, what exactly is it? The Hampshire? What breed is what we have, the feral hog that we have here?
It is domestic swine, many, many generations in the wild. It's pure Russian wild boar, and more than likely, it's the hybrids of the two.
And if people were trying to figure out what the problem is, what kind of damage are these hogs causing?
Well, initially, our damage was pretty much rural in nature to our agriculture industry across the state, and a conservative estimate of that damage that we conducted several years ago was $52 million annually, with landowners spending an additional $7 million on correcting the problems or controlling the hogs. Now, that is indeed conservative. Now, what we've seen in the last 10 years is these hogs expanding their range into both suburban and urban areas. And one bit of evidence you've probably seen yourself are the roadkills of hogs in more suburban urban areas that lead to vehicle damage and, in some cases, injury to humans.
All right, I got a lot of emails here. I'm going to try to get you. You tend to answer pretty fast, but just so you know, I got a lot of them coming. Chris writes, are feral hogs as tasty as farm-raised hogs?
I think they are. They're extremely lean. Of course, they're out there running for a living, and so their diet's going to be different. However, as you get up into some of the larger males, they can have what some people would term more gamey flavor, but certainly the smaller hogs, typically those under 150 pounds, and particularly the female segment of the population, quite good to eat. Very tasty.
I get emails like this a lot. Here, let me just read it out to you. This is Jeff in Seabrook. Mr. Berry, I'd love a chance to hunt feral hogs. I'm a single dad raising 3 kids on my own, so I can't afford a lease. I've been aware of the feral hog problem for years, and I've been more than willing to help cull the population. Are there opportunities for people like me that want to go on a weekend hunt of feral hogs?
Well, there are, and some of our public hunting areas, particularly those management areas under the control of Texas Parks and Wildlife, often have some very good value hunts for the public. The problem is on private land is in Texas, we're a private land state, as you know. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, in fact, 95% of the state is privately held. So most of our wildlife habitat, therefore, occurs on private land. But a lot of this land is already leased for hunting or just used for personal use. And if it's leased, then more than likely those landowners are going to reserve hog hunting along with other game species, if you will, for those lessees that are paying to be there. And so there's not as much private land open for feral hog hunting as you might think. Now, there are many, many places in the state of Texas that offer feral hog hunts on private land. They do come with a fee, but oftentimes those hunts are hundreds, if not thousands of dollars less than a comparable hunt that might be offered for a white-tailed deer, for example.
Are you familiar with the Isle hog? I don't know if you've heard of that, and what can we do to restrict their population?
I'm not sure what an Isle hog is. We've got, there are some 8 species of hogs in the same group as our feral hogs, and all of our domestic swine we have today are descendants of the Eurasian wild boar. Hogs were domesticated some 6,000 to 8,000 years ago in Europe and Asia, and so all of our domestic hogs are from that common ancestor, the Eurasian wild boar. This is the very same animal that you have over there today. That's a native species, and they've been brought to this country. Their descendants have been brought to this country, and the hybrids, and so now you just have a collage of the gene pool between feral hogs that are domestic swine gone wild and the true Eurasian wild boar. So therefore you can have just about any color, any body form that you can imagine out there scrounging through the state of Texas looking for something to eat and causing damage as they go.
Well, there is I think it's called an Isle hog that is apparently out of control, hard to restrain. causes a lot of damage and frustration. And I've got some, I know some people that would like to restrict that. They don't know how to do it.
You know, you mentioned Hawaii. Hawaii's had hogs since the Polynesians brought them in about 1,000 years ago, and feral hogs are a huge problem in the state of Hawaii, not only to agriculture, but the damage they do to native species in many of their national public lands.
Well, this Isle hog does a lot of damage. Dr. Billy Higginbotham is our guest, and he is a hog expert. I am going to get to some of your questions here. There's so many rolling in. Okay, so you were talking about hunting hogs. It's been said that a large boar is referred to as a poor man's grizzly hunt. How deadly are these large boars?
Well, that all depends. If you get them cornered up against a creek bank, for example, with a set of catching bay dogs, they don't mind coming through you to leave the area. Also, if you happen to get, just say out on an evening walk, get between a swine and her litter of a sow and her litter of pigs, then she could react to that. But more often than not, given the opportunity, they would rather flee than fight. But there's no question there's been more than one hunter put up a tree.
Hunter put up a tree, but hunters getting killed?
Not that I know of. There have been injuries, but typically it's in close quarters, particularly when hunting with dogs, and you have to get into close quarters with the hogs, and they have no qualms about coming over you in a situation like that where they don't have many options. But you know, you come up on a hog and see them as a group or see an individual, 99 times out of 100 they're going to go the other way given the opportunity.
Do you hunt hogs?
I do.
And then you might know this. What is, and I'm not admitting I've done anything, because I know there are pretty strict restrictions on this, but what is the deal with people not wanting to shoot hogs but to stick them?
Well, I guess that's just a personal preference of getting in close to their favorite species they're hunting, and typically that would be an activity that someone would do when they can get close to the animal, particularly when with the help of a set of catch dogs. I've never done that, but certainly, you know, many people will catch hogs with good dogs, and they'll actually tie the hogs up and carry them out alive. So you can get in and work with them in close quarters if you've got good dogs.
You know, people that don't know, it's a fascinating deal, these people, and the amount of time and money they spend on their dogs. But explain, if you would, the dogo and the bay dogs, and how people structure this with separate dogs, to how a hog hunt operates with these dogs, because the dogs are amazing.
Yeah, I won't get into breeds because there's such a variety of breeds, and everyone's got their favorite. It's kind of like talking about what's the best bird dog. But basically what hunters do is they have bay dogs, and they strike a scent, and they put the bay dogs down, and the bay dogs will follow that hog, and of course with a keen sense of smell, they'll bay up that hog and tend to hold it in a general area. And then when the hunters can move in a little closer, they'll release a catch dog. And I've seen all kinds of different breeds of dogs used as catch dogs as well, and they'll go in and they'll actually grab the hog and hold it, and then at that point the hogs can pretty much immobilize the hog until the hunters can arrive, and then the hunters in many cases tie the hog up, tie the legs together, hog tie if you will, and are able to carry him out. What we've seen, I think, over the last decade is a tendency for these hogs not to hold as well as they once did for the catch dogs, and so you get these runners, as they're called, that appear more and more frequently now, and it gets harder and harder for the bay dogs to actually bay the dogs up and hold them in an area long enough for the catch dogs to do their job. But it's typically a one hog at a time proposition.
if somebody, their neighbor comes home and they killed a feral hog, and they say, "Hey, I got plenty of meat. Would you like some?" Do you have any concerns over that?
Absolutely not. But let's back up one click. If a hunter is going to be field dressing and skinning feral hogs, do this. Simply put on a pair of cheap latex gloves and wear eyewear. That way, if that hog happened to be carrying any type of disease, you would virtually assure yourself of not being exposed, and then use the same field dressing and skinning techniques that you would use, for example, on white-tailed deer. Pork is pork. You want to refrigerate that meat as quickly as possible and cool it down. Keep in mind that there's no season, there's no limit. You can hunt hogs 24 hours a day. In fact, I could eliminate the feral hogs next week. All we would need is a 2-week season and a 2-hog limit, and we'd poach them out of existence. That doesn't exist, though. So just take care when you're field dressing them. Wear those cheap latex gloves, wear eyewear, cool the meat down. And, of course, pork being pork, you want to cook it thoroughly, get that internal temperature of the meat up around 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're good to go. Very lean, very tasty. Talking about hogs as a food item, we actually have buying stations scattered out across the state of Texas that will buy your feral hogs. They typically don't take many hogs under about 50 pounds, but you can actually recoup some of your cost in terms of the damage that they cause or the investment you've made in your equipment by selling live hogs to these buying stations. And the larger hogs right now, say over 200 pounds, in most places are bringing at least 40 cents a pound. So these hogs are sold to the buying stations. They're then carried to a USDA-inspected slaughter facility. The hogs are processed, and then they're shipped to Europe, Asia, and end up on white tablecloth restaurant menus here in the States.
And this is a government-run deal?
There is a way to put these hogs back into the human food chain commercially.
This is a government-run deal?
No, sir. This is privately operated. The buying stations work cooperatively with these private processing facilities. They are inspected.
How do you find a buying station?
Go to the Texas Animal Health Commission website and look for feral hog buying stations. There's probably 60 or 70 of them scattered across the state of Texas. They can only accept live hogs that are in good condition. They'll pay you for those hogs based on their size on the spot. Then they'll carry a load to the processing facility that they're affiliated with. Believe it or not, over the last 6 years, we've had some 450,000 feral hogs run through these buying stations, USDA inspected, slaughtered, and put into the human food chain, not only in this country, but Europe and Asia.
You don't know if they'll buy aisle hogs?
Oh, yes, they'll buy your hogs.
No, aisle hogs. You don't know if
no, I do not know the answer to that.
All right, I got a couple of questions for you here. James in Galveston writes, I am told that after the second generation in the wild, feral hogs will grow tusks again. Is that true or false?
They'll certainly, as you move into more frequent generations into the wild, they certainly revert back to that trait, no question about it.
That's a dormant trait that they grow tusks?
Well, you're talking about an animal, and it also depends on the genetics of those animals. We can't totally dismiss the impacts of domestic breeding over not only hundreds but thousands of years now. So, it depends, I think, some on the genetic background of the animal, but certainly within just a few generations, hogs that perhaps were from domestic blood can appear as wild as any species out there. But it's going to depend, I believe, some on the genetic background of those hogs as to how quickly they revert.
I'm getting a lot of emails on how to attract hogs, either to attract to a trap or to hunt them. We've used corn soaked in diesel. Do you think that's a bad idea?
I don't advocate using diesel because we don't know the impacts of diesel on those hogs when it's ingested. And keep in mind, if these hogs are going to a buying station destined for a processing plant, they're going to enter the human food chain. So I don't recommend putting diesel on corn. There's some other products out there that serve as repellents. The reason people put diesel on corn primarily is to discourage non-target species from eating the corn, like raccoons. Well, there are actually some products that are organic that serve as raccoon repellents that, in some studies we've recently conducted, cut way down on the raccoon consumption of corn. Corn's just one of many baits, and before I forget, let me give you my feral hog website where we have lots and lots of information on control techniques, baits, so forth and so on. But if your listeners will go to feral hogs, one word, feralhogs.tamu.edu, that's our feral hog website. And we have lots of publications and a lot of information on different baits, different trapping and control techniques. We've basically got just a handful of legal control techniques that we can use in the United States. We can snare, we can shoot, we can trap, and we can use dogs. That's it. Oftentimes you hear talk of using toxicants on feral hogs, and we have no approved toxicant. Yes. We have no approved toxicant in the United States that can be used for the express purpose of killing feral hogs, at least not at this point in time.
Christopher writes, did Texas change the law so hog meat can be donated to butchers like with venison where it goes to food banks?
I do not think that law has been changed. I know there's been some inquiries made in that regard to try to streamline that process to where it's somewhat similar to the, for example, the Hunters for the Hungry program where people can donate venison. But to my knowledge, that process has not been streamlined to include feral hogs at this point in time.
All right, hold on. I got more questions than I'm ever going to, but you should do a feral hog hotline every Saturday morning. Let's see. Somebody wanted to tell me the Red Hot Chili Peppers have funk. I don't really need to hear that. When you hunt hogs, what do you use?
Well, you're talking about from a firearm standpoint?
Yep.
Let's talk about the process of hunting. Hogs are highly nocturnal, especially if they've been pressured at all. So they're going to move mostly at night. Our remote cameras are telling us right now that they're really not beginning to get active until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So what I like to do is if I'm going to hunt an area and I've got the opportunity to do some advanced scouting, I want to go to those areas where there's activity, and I want to start baiting those areas, and if possible, use a remote camera that records the time and the date that those hogs are responding to bait. Once those hogs are patterned, you can cut way down on the time that you spend trying to swat mosquitoes or out in the cold. You can be there and come in from downwind of when those hogs are going to be there. Now, keep in mind, I'm shooting for control purposes. I'm not necessarily hunting for recreational purposes as much. Many people may say, well, they're one and the same, but for many landowners, they're using a firearm as a control tool. Therefore,
yeah, but let's not act like they're not enjoying it, Billy.
Well,
they're having fun
that's
shooting
an individual
pigs.
thing. I'm sure they enjoy reducing the amount of damage that's occurring on their property.
Dr. Billy Higginbotham. I almost said Higginbotham because I was thinking of all my pork jokes. Dr. Billy Higginbotham, who is a feral hog expert, is our guest. Doug in Spring writes, Michael, hopefully you will post this interview with the Hog Man on your blog. I know many of my neighbors here in Bender's Landing, where we have a big hog problem, will want to listen to it, and I will post a link to it on our neighborhood website. Have you ever heard of Sheila Jackson Lee?
Have not.
Okay, she's a congressman here in town. Let me see here. That was the one about Bender's Landing. Then I got another one. Michael, please ask Billy Higginbotham if he believes the behavioral change in rattlesnakes, that is, not rattling any longer, is caused by the overpopulation of Texas feral hogs. This has become a hot pig topic, and it seems to make sense that a snake wouldn't rattle in defense and instead will just lay still because a feral hog will eat a rattlesnake. Is that true?
I do not know the answer to that, but we
Oh,
do
that's the
know
first
that
question you didn't know the answer to.
that that feral hogs do a tremendous amount of damage to our little herp and related populations. You know, Mike, in the winter they roll these logs over. They feed on lizard snakes, frogs. There are some fairly major impacts by these critters as they feed on many of these smaller species, and you often hear comments made by landowners that when my feral hog population increased, my snake population decreased. And so I haven't found anything yet that feral hogs won't eat.
Tell me something about hogs that would surprise people. Just
let's stick to this same topic. A study done in the southeastern United States on food habits, they captured one large boar, and as they were dissecting that hog to do food habits, he contained some 41 toads in his stomach that he had already swallowed. So as you can see, the impacts on these small herp populations can be considerable.
We have a boar here in Houston. It's an Iowa hog. We'll talk about that off air. Please, Chad and Winnie writes, please ask Billy if he heard about the state helicopter flying the McFadden Refuge and some other ranches where they killed about 650 hogs in about 22 hours or so of flying.
That doesn't surprise me. Wildlife Services, which is a branch of Texas AgriLife Extension, works on aerial gunning through helicopters a great deal, and it is a very effective tool if you've got trained personnel involved. And they are able to
Is this like a sniper in the air?
They use both shotguns and rifles, and you have to be in the more open areas of the state. As you go west and south, you have more country open up to you because of less vegetative cover. But certainly they're capable of, when conditions are right, 20 to 30 hogs per hour of flight time. And so it can be a very effective means of removing feral hogs. We just can't use it all over the state because as you move up into my part of the state, into East Texas, due to the heavy tree cover, it becomes difficult from a visibility standpoint. But January, February, early March is prime time when aerial gunning is probably at its best in terms of maximum visibility, and they can remove a large number of feral hogs in a short period of time.
I got an email.
Helicopter.
I got an email from a guy who says he has a verifiable story of 20 hogs shot from a chopper, and 18 had deer in their bellies. You believe that?
Don't know. We do know that feral hogs will predate on fawns. In southwest Texas, in the sheep and goat country, they feed on both lambs and kid goats. In Australia, on the sheep stations, feral hogs are a huge predator on their lambs. And so will they feed on white-tailed deer? Absolutely. They will not pass up a fawn given the opportunity. Are they a major predator on white-tailed deer? That's questionable from a population standpoint.
Michael, ask Mr. Higginbotham if there is a technology that he knows of to remotely close a trap door using a remote camera. Has he heard of wirelesstraps.com? You know, there's an iPhone app. I don't know if you know about this.
There is that technology. I've seen the advertisements for it. I have not used it personally, so I can't attest to its effectiveness. But certainly, you know, the more tools that we have at our disposal for landowners, many of whom are absentee landowners that, you know, may work in town, live in town, only on their weekend place or farm or ranch on weekends, any technology that helps them in the battle of feral hogs to reduce damage they cause is great. Many of our techniques that we use currently are custom made for absentee landowners that they can bait those hogs over a period of time and then use that remote camera technology to determine the movement patterns of those hogs and be able to set the trap on their terms to trip and be able to remove those hogs effectively. And so to me, the greatest tool we have at our disposal are these, what people call game cameras. They're remote sensing cameras that are triggered by movement or body heat. And they are a wonderful tool for patterning hogs, and particularly in trapping to determine when they are entering a trap, using that trap, comfortable with the presence of the trap, and then letting you know when you can set that trap to actually catch, and virtually guaranteeing that you're going to be successful at removing some portion of that population.
Is it true that pigs get rich and hogs get slaughtered?
Could be. I'll tell you this, pigs are smart, much smarter than a white-tailed deer.
Really?
Absolutely.
Well, there you have it.